So it's official. E3 2020 is officially canceled, and obviously that's not great news considering so many people tune into E3 to get their gaming fix for the year. That's obviously going to hurt the industry just a little, but honestly, to me, it's really not that big a deal if you think about it, just because if you look at the way the industry is actually going, the industry is actually moving away from E3, and that's been happening for the last couple of years. Actually, you can argue for like the last 4 to 5 years, just because, well, a lot of these news that's actually given to us at E3 has actually already been leaked out months before the show actually goes live, so there's less incentive to actually watch the show. And then on top of that, in the last couple of years, like for instance Sony is actually a company that actually doesn't even want anything to do with E3, and they actually want to do their own thing by not showing up to E3. And last year was their first year not showing up to E3, and then this year, even if E3 was going to happen, let's face it, Sony was not going to show up to E3 just because, well, like I said, they didn't want anything to do with E3, and that's honestly not great news. And then on top of Sony just not wanting anything to do with E3, there has been a lot of different companies just backing out of E3 for whatever the case may be. And then we heard news that Jeff Keighley's not going to be there, but that makes sense. He's probably more invested in the Game Awards, and the Game Awards in the last couple of years is definitely starting to be more of like a mini E3, and that way, just because they show a lot of game announcements at the Game Awards, whether it being more for the actual Game Awards. That's why a lot more people started tuning into the Game Awards to see all these different game announcements. Granted, last year's Game Awards, I would argue, wasn't the best, just because they didn't really have any mind-blowing announcements like they did the previous year for the Game Awards. But either way, the Game Awards just seems like it's gearing towards more that mini E3 aspect, and everyone's just looking forward to the Game Awards, just because, hey, you never know what's likely to happen at the Game Awards. And now companies are realizing that there is a lot of people actually tuning into the Game Awards. Like for instance, last year if you look at the Game Awards, for instance, you can see that Microsoft really wanted people to pay attention to the brand new Xbox, the Xbox Series X. Granted, we really didn't get a lot of information about the Series X, but just the fact that it was revealed at the Game Awards really shows you the way the industry is headed, and not many companies now are really trying to be invested in E3. Of course, we still have Microsoft, we still have Nintendo really participating in the E3, and there's a lot of other companies that still relatively care about E3, but in the last couple of years, it just seems like E3 is becoming a thing of the past. So I'm not really too surprised about this news, honestly. And honestly, I don't think you're probably surprised about this news, because, hey, it makes sense that it needs to be canceled. And honestly, it is good that it's actually canceled, because obviously, I guess coronavirus is no joke, and they really need to make sure that everyone's not going to get sick and things like that, because they've already shown that people are dying from this pretty big epidemic that we already have currently going on in the world, and it's just not good. So of course the next step would actually be to actually cancel E3, and E3 is not the only thing that's canceled this year. There is a whole bunch of big events that are being canceled, not just in the gaming industry, but in different industries alone, and it makes sense. Would it have been canceled this year? Most likely no, it wouldn't have been canceled this year, even though more and more people are becoming less interested in E3, and it shows that a lot of different things leak out for E3. It just would have still kept going. Of course, what are these companies going to actually do? Most of these companies are actually probably going to do what Nintendo does. They're probably going to have their own little presentation. And of course, Nintendo has their own presentation anyway, so they're probably going to have to figure out a way to actually do that. It won't be too hard. They'll just have to do some online show where they actually showcase, like for instance, Xbox shows their new console, it shows their games. Same thing with Nintendo. Nintendo technically already does that with an E3 at Nintendo. They do the Treehouse Live at E3, but they're going to have to do that somewhere else. But overall, it's not that big a deal. But it does suck for people who are looking forward to E3 this year, especially since this year in particular is one of those bigger years, just because we have the new consoles on the horizon. We have the Xbox Series X and the PS5. Sure, of course, the PS5 wasn't actually going to be at E3. Of course, Sony was actually going to do their own thing when it actually comes to announcing the PS5. Unlike Microsoft, Microsoft was definitely going to unveil the Xbox Series X and all the features at E3, but we won't get this year. But like I said, it's going to be also interesting to see when they're actually going to unveil this stuff now, because literally they can do it whenever they want, and each company can do it like I said, whenever they want. So it's interesting. Are they still going to do it around the time E3 is still going, was supposed to be planned? Are they just going to do it sooner or a little bit afterwards? Because now the cards are in each company's hand when it comes to leaking information for it. I'm assuming you'd want to still do it around the time E3 was going to go on, just because it would make sense. It would get everybody excited. It's around that time anyway, and most people were expecting E3. So honestly, I would personally still do my game announcements around E3's thing. But honestly, I never thought I would see the day, at least soon, that E3 would actually be canceled. And this time it's not canceled because the E3 is starting to dwindle down, which is true. It's actually being canceled because that big virus is actually going out. Honestly, if you ask me also, I really do think a lot of people are just exaggerating this, because I don't think it's that big a deal, but I understand they want to make sure as many people as possible aren't going to get sick. And E3 is one of the biggest gaming conventions, or one of the biggest conventions yearly, and a lot of people go to this convention, so it makes sense that they would want to try to make sure everybody is as healthy as possible and not really start to spread this virus, because this virus can spread like a wildfire, and overall it can make people really sick. So I guess it's okay that they are canceling E3 this year because of the actual virus. The next one on the list is actually going to be about YouTube. Whether you love them or hate them, YouTube always does some questionable moves to always piss off their content creators. And this time, they've kind of went into the direction again of making their content creators kind of mad. Honestly, I don't know if this video is actually going to be demonetized because of this, because it looks like it might be demonetized if I talk about this certain topic. So I'm just going to say, basically what YouTube is actually doing is YouTube is actually demonetizing people who talk about the current virus that's currently spreading around the world. Of course, I'm not going to name that virus for my video to potentially be demonetized, which is unfortunate. And it looks like now they're actually going back into the direction of actually monetizing videos that actually talks about this certain virus that's actually currently going on in the world. And I honestly think that's the right way to do it, because YouTube was always a platform to express your opinions about certain things. Of course, there was guidelines in place, as long as you don't talk about something too dangerous or something outside of the lines. You know, it was okay to speak your mind, and talking about a virus per se wasn't anything too crazy. And sometimes you just want to cover these topics, especially like if you're a news channel here on YouTube that primarily does a lot of news articles, you would want to talk about that, and there are reasons why you'd just want to talk about it. So it is very interesting that YouTube, of all companies, is saying, nope, if you talk about it, you can still talk about it. We won't remove your content. However, you will be demonetized for talking about this certain topic. And I think that's not fair, because you should have the right to talk about certain things. Of course, there is still some guidelines in place, like you don't want to talk about things that are too violent or too sexual, of course, and things like this. But honestly, for me, I don't think this certain virus was really that big of a deal. So honestly, I don't know why YouTube would want to stop people from talking about it, but I guess it's just so big of a deal that they want to try to make sure that if you do talk about it, you're not going to be getting monetized, to try to prevent people from talking about it. But it should be freedom of speech, and also YouTube was always about content creation first, and you should have the rights to actually talk about what you want in the guidelines of the community. And I really do feel like this is not stressing it too far, which is actually a little bit ridiculous, because that means some people who are going to talk about this now have to change what they want to say in certain videos, or in a whole video down outright, because now they can't talk about this. And that does suck, that a lot of times content creators can't speak their mind just because they're worried about demonetization. Luckily, I've never really experienced hardcore demonetization. I have had demonetization on my YouTube channel here and there, and sometimes also they don't really explain it correctly. Why are your videos being demonetized? It says, oh, it's not suitable for advertisers. But why isn't it suitable for advertisers? And you look at the video and it's not clear. And a lot of times too, when you look at your own videos, you're like, wait a second, I didn't really do anything too bad. Like, I didn't really curse too hard, I didn't talk about too many sexual themes, too many violent themes, I didn't talk about anything too bad, so why am I getting demonetized? It's just very iffy. And I can see why so many content creators are pretty mad, whether it's this specifically or whether it's things in the past, like when we had a big epidemic where a demonetization was just a really big deal, and that's why YouTube still has a lot of work to do when it comes to being more transparent with their content creators, letting content creators talk about certain topics even if they're not too bad. There is really this weird line too, is you think you're talking about something that's not going to get you demonetized, and then lo and behold, after you talk about what you want to talk about on your video, you get demonetized because it wasn't part of their guidelines, or they just don't like these people trying to influence the world, which YouTube was always a platform that stood for creators first. So honestly, I don't really understand their thinking behind actually demonetizing people to talk about this virus. But yes, you're more likely to talk about this virus now. Keep in mind, of course, you're still really not guaranteed to actually have your stuff not be demonetized, because you can still talk about it, but then you can still get your stuff demonetized. It does say YouTube will start slowly monetizing content around this topic. It says slowly, so who knows if your content will be undemonetized, if it's already, or will it be monetized again if it got undemonetized, and if you make a brand new one, are you guaranteed? It's also weird which people they choose to actually target to. It's really weird because sometimes you'll talk about a certain topic, you won't get demonetized, but then another person who talks about it will get demonetized. Honestly, it's just very weird, and sometimes it does make you think, is somebody actually against your channel specifically? But I do know for the most part they do go by an algorithm, like a robot who is a software that actually chooses and picks what to do in your videos, and that always has scared me for the longest time, because sometimes having these algorithms in place just aren't the smartest. They can't really determine what content is good, suitable content for advertisers, and what content is not suitable for certain advertisers out there on the internet. So it is very weird how they actually handle this. And as a content creator, anytime you hear something like this, it's just honestly not good news for the community, because the community is always scared, because you never know what's in the guidelines and what's not in the guidelines when it comes to your stuff being monetized or not. And the thing that really sucks about this is the fact that you may spend a very long time uploading, editing, rendering a video, and then lo and behold, you spent all your time making this amazing video you thought was actually suitable for monetization, and then lo and behold, what happens? It's not advertiser friendly, and they don't want nothing to do with you. Now, at least I do know, besides this one, YouTube is starting to become a little bit more user friendly when it actually comes to monetization, just because I heard you can start doing a little bit more edgier stuff on your content. Like for instance, you can talk about edgier content. Of course, there still is some guidelines. There's always stuff that's going to be off limits, of course, and I agree, there has to be stuff that's off limits, because there's some topics or some news articles you just can't talk about or can't cover because they're just too edgy. And then on top of that, there's just some other stuff that's just not right. But it is nice that it looks like some people out there have confirmed that they've been maybe cussing a little bit more in their videos, are talking about a little bit more edgier content, and more advertisers are starting to open up. It makes sense though that some advertisers would actually want to take content that's actually a little bit more edgier and advertise on those videos, because those videos who are doing a little bit more edgier content with maybe cussing and maybe edgier topics are trying to appeal to a different demographic than like a kid-friendly video. So maybe they would want to advertise to people who are much more mature, who care about that content, because that's a way to promote your content, to sell your content overall, really get your content out there to a different demographic. And you can't really promote certain items on a video that's made for kids and things like that. Why would an advertiser want to be on a video for kids? They would want to be on a video that's a little bit more edgier. Overall, I'm not really too happy with the news is that some content that should probably be monetized friendly is being demonetized, and that really shows why a lot of people really do despise YouTube in a lot of ways. But in a lot of ways, they are really good for the content creator, and they're also really trying to figure out what they want to do with YouTube as a whole. But this news is just not good news, and I can see why so many people just are so mad at YouTube in the last like 3, 4, 5 years. They've been doing a lot of like questionable stuff regarding their content creators. It really does seem like they're anti-content creators when it comes to letting their content creators make whatever they want, and it forces their content creators to change the way they run their channel or produce their content, which is just not a good feeling. Now it looks like Sony, of all companies, has confirmed they're not going to be like Microsoft, and they're not going to be releasing their games on day one to the PC. They are still going to be PlayStation exclusive, even though it has already confirmed that Horizon Zero Dawn is actually coming to the PC at this very moment. There is another article out that's actually explaining why they don't actually want to be like Microsoft and release their stuff day one. They still want to have a pretty good reason for people to actually jump on the PlayStation bandwagon and actually get people to actually buy in to PlayStation. And honestly, I think the biggest reason to actually buy a console is actually for the exclusives, at least in my opinion. And data does show that people do buy a console based off the exclusives, because having good third-party support and then having good first-party support like exclusive games really does make people want to buy your system over other systems, especially if the games are actually good. So I actually see why Sony would not want to do that as a company. But yes, it does look like Horizon Zero Dawn is actually coming to PC. On one hand, I'm actually very glad about this, because that means more people get to experience Horizon Zero Dawn, which is a flat-out amazing open-world game if you never played Horizon Zero Dawn. But on another hand, it takes away the exclusivity away from the PlayStation, because that means that's one less game to get excited for when it comes to the PlayStation brand. But I guess they still do have quite a few other exclusives when it actually comes to the PlayStation brand, so it's not that big a deal. And like I said, it does get people who wouldn't originally play this game to play your game otherwise, so you would be making a little bit more extra cash, honestly, just by making your game multi-platform, and that's what they're doing here with Horizon Zero Dawn. And honestly, I can't say that's a bad thing. I'm leaning more towards it's actually a good thing. But yes, you don't want to make all your games exclusive to like multiple not exclusive, sorry. You don't want to make all your games on multiple platforms, because then it gives people less reason to actually buy your console in the first place. But I'm also glad that some games come over to the PC as well, because that means you can run them in better quality in terms of the frame rate, in terms of the resolution. Overall, the game is going to look phenomenal, and I am actually very excited to see how Horizon Zero Dawn is going to look like on the PC, since the game's never been on PC architecture before. I mean, when you look at this game on something like a base PS4 or even a PS4 Pro, this game looks flat out fantastic and it looks amazing. But taking it to the next step, where you actually have PC hardware to actually run this game, I actually really do think that this game in the long run is actually going to be an amazing game when this game hits PC, and I'm very excited to see how this game is actually going to run with higher frame rate and with higher resolutions and overall better graphics as well. This game's going to look amazing, and it's going to be nice for, like I said, people who really haven't played the game to begin with. So overall, this is a win-win for Sony, and on top of that, at least this one is a game that's been out for quite some time. It came out the same year that Breath of the Wild came out. It came out around 2017, and since this game came out in 2017, a lot of people probably already played it who were gonna play it in the first place. And if you haven't played, I guess there's a reason why to actually play it on PC. It's okay to actually make a game multi-platform, especially when it's older, because that means if you leave it like a timed exclusive, which timed exclusives mean they're on a console for like a year or two and then they go multi-platform, I'm actually okay with that, because that also means that you'll get people to buy the console right away, because they don't want to wait that 1 or 2 years after the game's been out to go play it on a different platform. They'll buy your platform again just to play that one single game, because they cannot wait, because it looks amazing, and then you release it right away. I think that's also a very good strategy overall, which I like a lot of these companies doing, like Microsoft, Sony now doing it. Of course, Nintendo will always be, I feel like, that one company. For some reason, they just don't want to make their games multi-platform no matter what. They don't want to release them on different consoles or the PC. They always want to give reasons to actually play the Nintendo consoles. But it's also funny that Nintendo makes some of the best and the most exclusive games to their dedicated hardware. So you would think they would at least want to like license out 1 or 2 of their games to like PC or other consoles. But I guess they're really holding on to their IPs altogether, and they really don't want people accessing their IPs altogether. The next one is going to be about Gears of War, because we do have some new information about Gears of War. There was supposed to be a Gears of War, I think, a turn-based strategy or tactical game, kind of like XCOM. If you ever played XCOM, or if you ever played Mario X Rabbids, honestly, I really thought that was those are very good games if you like those games. They're kind of like Fire Emblem or Advanced Wars and things like that, but then they also have their own flair, because they feel slightly different to something like they feel a little bit different than your Fire Emblems of the world and your standard tactics games. But yeah, I do like XCOM games. I think they have a lot of strategy. But this one is nowhere near that. I actually wonder what happened to that Gears of War game that was supposed to be an XCOM style game. This one is actually going to be a card style game like Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh or Pokemon, basically a TCG, a trading card game, and I actually think that's very interesting. I know why companies would actually want to turn their game into like a card-based strategy game, because that does mean these are some of the easiest games to actually monetize in terms of like loot boxes, microtransactions, and things like that. Because of course, to get all the cards you want, you have to open up random loot boxes or random card packs, and that does make sense. And a lot of times these games are actually fun, and these games are good on a whole bunch of different platforms. They can put them on like console, they can put them on things like PC. Of course, the best place to play these games would definitely be the mobile landscape, like iOS or Android, tablet or phone. It really does make sense to actually put it on these consoles. And it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays. You do have to keep in mind there is a lot of card games on the market, and I would honestly say that there's enough on the market that these TCG style games are actually flooding the market, and it's interesting that there's been a lot throughout the years that actually have failed. Like for instance, I think there's been like one based off of the Elder Scrolls. There's been one made by Valve. I forgot the name of that. That one flopped. There's been a whole bunch of ones that actually flopped throughout the years, and alongside them having like a digital card game, there's also a lot of physical card games out there that you can buy that aren't video games. They're actually real life card games you can buy in card packs. There's just a lot of choice, and you really have to find something that's really going to stand out from the crowd. I guess it is cool that it is Gears of War themed. What I really want to know is how this game's played, since there is a lot of choice on the market, and there's already a lot of ones that people are invested. I feel like once you get invested into one of these card games, you really have to stick with one card game, because trying to spend a lot of money buying all these card packs, which is the case a lot of times, and then on top of that, really trying to learn the card game. A lot of times the big make it or break it for these TCG style card games is going to be the fact that how complicated is the game to actually learn for people who never play these games, or even for people who do play these games a lot. How complicated is your mechanics? And that's really one big downside to these things. And the one thing that's really going to make it or break it for these games, without a doubt, is definitely going to be the microtransactions. That's kind of what killed off the Valve one. A lot of people were actually complaining about the Valve one, which I forgot the name of. I think it's called actually Artifact, now that I think about it. It's called Artifact, and the problem with Artifact from Valve was the fact that it was very expensive to get invested in their TCG style game, and that's why a lot of people just didn't like it. On top of that, I don't think the card game was actually fun to play. I don't know how it actually played, but I do know the biggest downfall to that game was actually the fact that that game didn't have it had bad microtransactions. They were just really trying to nickel and dime you when it actually comes to the experience. So yeah, that really does suck. So we'll have to see. It looks like this game is actually coming out later this year. I don't know what platform this is on. It looks like a very interesting game, but right now we really, as far as I'm aware, we don't actually have a lot of information on this actual card game, so who knows. But so far it looks promising, but like I said again, we really will have to wait. At least the nice thing with this card game, it is based off of a video game franchise, and it really does seem like all these card games that are coming out as well are not actually based off of like just a random ass set of like cards. They're actually based off of video games. Like Hearthstone is actually based off of World of Warcraft, and some other ones are based off of video games as well. So yeah, overall just very interesting, and you might want to check this one out if you're into maybe Gears of War. But then again, I don't know if you like this if you play Gears of War, because looking at this card game specifically, this card game looks like it is very different than your Gears of War. Of course, Gears of War is a third-person shooter, which has a lot of cover mechanics, and this one is a card game, which are two different games. So I don't think they're really trying to sell this really per se to people who play Gears of War. They're really trying to sell it to the crowd who plays TCGs or slow-paced games. But then again, I can see them actually targeting people who really do play Gears of War, because it does have a lot. It is based off the Gears of War universe, and every card is going to be Gears of War themed with Gears of War characters and Gears of War properties and things like that. So yeah, very interesting to say the least. Okay, I'm back, guys. I had to make a random jump cut there just because, well, I got actually interrupted. But let's talk about this last story in today's video. I actually want to talk about Doom Eternal because it looks like already confirmed Doom Eternal on Google Stadia won't be true 4K, and this one is not a good sign because so many people aren't happy with the way Google is handling Google Stadia, because back in November of 2019, so last November when this thing released, basically the biggest problem with Google Stadia was the fact that a lot of the features that Google actually promised with Google Stadia just weren't there. And this is another case where Doom Eternal is not going to be true 4K on Google Stadia, and that's a big reason why you wouldn't want to subscribe to Google Stadia. And honestly, for me, I do have to agree. I think I'm one of those people too. If I did subscribe to Google Stadia, which I don't subscribe to Google Stadia in the first place for a whole bunch of different reasons, would just make me not want to actually subscribe to Google Stadia. I mean, for a lot of people, 4K may not be a big deal, but just the fact that Google is not promising all these features that they promised at launch is not a good sign. And this one really does probably make people a little bit mad just due to the fact that, well, Doom Eternal is not going to be true 4K on Google Stadia. And it looks like they actually promised this game to actually be actually 4K when this game actually comes out on Google Stadia, and that's not good. Now, taking in consideration too, we have a lot of different options to play games, and there's other services coming out like NVIDIA GeForce Now, and then on top of that, we're going to have xCloud coming out from Microsoft. You can play these games on console, and some consoles now are getting close to playing these games at 4K. Next generation is totally going to play games at probably true 4K now. Overall, it's just not a very good sign, and if Google can't keep their promises, of course, it doesn't give confidence to their consumers. Of course, why would you want to buy Google Stadia if you are not Google's not keeping all their promises? And I'm just not really a fan of this, and it really does show the path of Google Stadia. It really does seem like there's all these articles coming out that Google still doesn't know how to handle Google Stadia. They're not keeping up with their promises. A lot of these features are just not coming, or they're promising them, but they'll be coming later down the road, and that's not fair, especially when a lot of people did back Google Stadia. I know Google Stadia came out, like I said, November of 2019, and they already had a whole bunch of features that were promised on day one that just were not there, and you don't want to have to pay for this thing too, especially when you have to pay for the service, and then on top of that, you have to pay for each individual game. That's just not good, especially if you wanted to play the game in 4K. A lot of people may be trying to unsubscribe to your service, and they might play it on their PC or their console that can't support this game in true 4K. I'm assuming that it might support some type of 4K. Let me read the article here. I think it might support some type of 4K. No, it doesn't even. No, it won't render higher than 1440p, it looks like here. If you look at this article, let me go ahead and highlight it right here. It says render higher than 1440p, and that's just not good. I mean, it is better than 1080p, and to a lot of people that'll be just okay. It's not even the fact that it can't play in 4K for a lot of people. It's just the fact that they promised 4K and now they're not delivering 4K for Doom Eternal, which is absolutely insane. It's just not a good look for your company, and a lot of people are going to unsubscribe, and a lot of people are going to tell their friends, hey, don't subscribe to Google Stadia because, oh, look, Google Stadia is actually a service that actually can't be trusted just because, well, they don't actually keep their promises to their consumers. A lot of times they just want to half-ass the service and try to get away with as little features as possible just to save money, just to save time, and oh, we can half-ass it because people won't actually care. They'll still buy our streaming service because we still have some pretty good features, but we're missing a lot of stuff that we promised. No, that is not the way to handle your service, and it does not give people confidence in your service because that means we can't trust you in the future when you try to add features or add games and things like that. And Google is always in a weird state too when it comes to their services. Time and time again, if you go to the internet and just type in Google's services that shut down throughout the years, there's been a host of Google services that have shut down, and this thing's too early, and I can definitely see this thing potentially actually shutting down, and that's not good news for something that's been on the market for just a little while. Taking in consideration, a lot of people may already invested in Google Stadia, whether it's a lot of time or a lot of money, and just to know that you're never guaranteed a service with Google specifically is not good news, especially when you take in consideration how new Google Stadia is to begin with. And Google Stadia is just a very new concept. It's just really not too good. And yeah, I'm just not really a big fan of them lying to their consumers when this game was supposed to be originally in 4K to begin with. Honestly, I wouldn't care if it didn't play in 4K, to be honest, because I'm not a graphics whore and I don't need the best of the best. Just the fact that they're not keeping up their promises is just not good, and it doesn't give me confidence to actually back a product that they can't keep their promises, because you have to realize it's not a free service. It's actually a paid service. Either you pay for the service outright, or I do know they're going to have a free tier, but even with the free tier, I think you still have to pay for your games, and knowing that you're paying for a service that doesn't keep their promises and a lot of different instances is just really not good news. So overall, I'm just not too happy with this. Get your act together, Google. Google needs to figure out how to keep their promises. If you promise something to the consumers, and we're paying our hard-earned money for these games and for the services, you really have to keep your promises, because then people will stop trusting you and stop really going to your service. And honestly, just not great news. So yeah, there's just more news that Google is not giving us all the features that they promised, or they're half-fasting the service, which is just not great news. And you have to keep your promises too when there's other services on the market, like Xbox, like the xCloud from Microsoft, also Google, also NVIDIA GeForce Now's coming out, and just other stuff's coming out. Just doesn't give a lot of consumers confidence in your product. And honestly, I would still be very iffy to back this, knowing that you never know what's going to happen to this service specifically, since they didn't come out and release this thing strong. I think what happened is, with Google here, they wanted to release this product as soon as possible, and maybe they didn't have all these features ready, but they promised all these features just so they can be the first one on the market that actually has a true, pretty good streaming service. I know there's been one in the past. I think OnLive was a streaming service way back in the day, back in like 2012 or 2013. Of course, you guys know how that actually went. It actually flopped, but it flopped for a whole bunch of different reasons. Of course, I'm not going to get into those there, but yeah, I think if Google Stadia actually does flop, it'll be for a lot of these broken promises that Google Stadia just did not want to go through with, and they just really wanted to be first on the market and really just half-ass their product to their consumers. And yeah, that's pretty much going to do it for this episode. Anyway, guys, this is Wayne from MyTech News, signing out.